Hello, I'm Kyle O'Dowd, Deputy Director for NECDL, the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. NECDL is a member of the ABA House of Delegates and the only National Bar Association representing both private and public defense lawyers at the state and federal level. With me today are Melody Brannon and Shazi Nasim. Melody Brannon is the federal public defender for the District of Kansas. She's been with the Defenders for 26 years now and serves as the Defender Chair of the Defender Services Advisory Group. Shazi Nasim is a partner at the Kansas City law firm of Berkowitz Oliver. He is a criminal justice panel attorney for the U.S. District Court for the District of Kansas. He is also the interim national co-chair for the Defender Services Advisory Group and the CJA panel representative on the Defender Services Committee. To briefly summarize the background of the Defender Services budget crisis, back in the summer of 2023, the House and Senate both released the respective versions of the appropriations bill that funds the Defender Services budget. At that point, both bills were more than $100 million short of what was needed to sustain funding, to sustain staffing, to sustain operations for the Defender Services. Melody, to start with you, how did we get to that point?
When we went into the appropriation season in 2023, we were actually cycling out of COVID and the pandemic and everything that had happened there. And the effect of that and sort of coming back into full functioning with more prosecutorial initiatives and so forth, we had what was called a carryover, which is money that we had not spent during the low times of the pandemic, carrying over into our budget going forward. The problem was that when this was presented to Congress, it was not done in a way that Congress appreciated that we had this carryover. And so when we get our appropriations, they reduce it by that amount, which instead of leaving us flat or giving us what we had requested, left us 70 to 100 million short of what we needed going into 2024. That put us in a crisis mode, because if we were held to those standards, and we would have been looking at 9 to 12% layoffs, a reduction in onboard staff. And
what was the staffing situation before all this?
it was interesting because we had been about 4,200 nationally. And we had just come out of a judicially mandated staffing work staff formula measurement. And so we were anticipating going into June 2023 that we were going to get more staffing, significantly more staffing, because that's what the judiciary said we needed. So we were looking to ramp up at that point to meet the needs that we had. And so it's quite a shock to be preparing to ramp up based on what the judiciary said, and then go completely the other direction and sort of bottom out with these low congressional marks.
Yeah, and I know the defenders for several years now have faced an increased volume of cases, an increased complexity of cases brought on by some unusual circumstances, but also just that's the trend. The defenders have already absorbed some of this impact. Can you describe what you all have done to make ends meet in the meantime?
As soon as we learned of the low marks, we did an analysis of where that would leave us if we didn't take certain measures. And so we immediately implemented these strict austerity measures that included a hiring freeze. We stopped a lot of training, and basically we stopped all expenditures that where we possibly could. And that meant that our staffing started to go down and our resources started to go down. When we hit a certain point, that means that we send those cases out to the panel, to Shazi, and they were not necessarily anticipating this increase in the amount of work that we had to do. That left us severely understaffed, under-resourced, and so this depletion has been rather devastating to us.
And it's not the first time that offenders have encountered this type of shortfall. Back in 2013, there was something called budget sequestration that I know hit the defenders pretty hard. Can you describe what it was like to recover from something like that?
Yes, and we've drawn heavily on the lessons we learned in sequestration. And one of the things we learned is that when we when we start to lose resources and deplete like this, we can't just like, as soon as we get money, we're back where we were. It took us years and years to rebuild from what we suffered in sequestration. I don't think we started to really come out of that until 2016. And so we know that it costs a lot more to rebuild than it does to maintain, and it takes a lot of time to rebuild after this sort of shortfall.
Yeah. So in concrete numbers, just looking ahead, if the cuts go through, what sort of impact are you looking at?
It already has had a devastating impact because of the hiring freeze, because we chose, we weren't going to bring people on board knowing that we were going to have to turn around and furlough or lay off. But if we go back to where we were in July of 2023 when these hit, at that point, if those numbers held, we were looking at a 9 to 12% decrease in our onboard staff. Now that we've already started to lose during the hard hiring freeze, that's already come into play. We are hopeful that going forward at this point, we could maintain our onboard staff, but that just means that we're going to have to send more and more out to the panel and burden the panel in ways that they didn't anticipate. And the panel are mostly small business owners, and the effect on them is that they're not going to get paid on time. And so all of this is going to stress the system tremendously. There's a cascading consequence when I can't represent someone and it gets handed off and interrupted. We don't have enough money to do everything we need to do with discovery. That slows things down in court. That delays court hearings. It delays trials. And so it's going to impact every aspect of the judicial system.
Shazi, I think that's your cue. Could you unpack a little bit of what Melody just said about the impact on CJA panel attorneys? Well, first of all, why do we even have CJA panel attorneys in the federal system? Couldn't we just give all this money to the federal defenders and let them handle all of the cases?
Well, and to follow up with what Melody said, I think it's the depletion of resources that are available to the Federal Public Defender's Office that necessitates the involvement of CJA panel attorneys on a regular basis. It's not just recently with some of the budget cuts, but the fact that there are so many cases brought in every district every year. The Federal Public Defender's Office can only handle so much, and so they have to, as an outlet valve, send these cases out to the panel so that their office can deal competently with the cases that they have, and then rely on outsourced resources to do the same so that every client has the best representation possible, that each of the attorneys can analyze the issues in a way that is best for their client. And that raises the second point, which is that because there are so many cases that are brought, and oftentimes they are large conspiracy cases that involve a number of different defendants, the Federal Public Defender's Office can only handle one of those clients in a large conspiracy case. And so there's a conflict of interest that exists if you were to take on any more than one in that conspiracy. And so if you have a conspiracy with 20, 25 people, which is not uncommon, you have to have panel attorneys pick up the rest of those cases so that everybody has the best chance of a good defense. And the court system benefits from that as well, because when it has multiple attorneys that can handle the cases, it knows that each of the clients are being dealt with in the best possible way, in addition to the Federal Public Defender's Office. So it's an outlet valve in terms of the times when there's depletion of resources, but it's also, I think, a necessary component to the implementation of justice in the right way.
And if funds are severely restricted, what sort of impact would you expect to see on the panel?
I think the main issue that we just touched on, which is the idea that each of us are operating as CJA panel attorneys in probably 90% of the time as a small business, small solo business. Most criminal defense firms are probably 5 people or less. You rarely find large firms of hundreds of people that are only devoted to criminal defense. And so that smaller group of folks, be it a small office or a small contingent within a larger office, rely heavily on ensuring that invoices that are submitted are paid. We are, just business people that have rent, we have leases, we have expenses like any other small business. And so a delay in payment to a small business where you have to obviously pay your employees on time is a huge, huge detriment to the way that we operate. And so anytime you have a small business, the flow of money inside is critical. And if there are delays because of budgetary constraints, we are just not well situated to handle that kind of impact for the expenses that we have to pay every month.
And would something like that have an impact on the panel composition?
I think if you have small business owners, lawyers who are unsure about what funding looks like for the future and unsure about the timeliness of payments for work that's performed, I think what you're going to find is that you're going to have people leave the panel. I mean, they have expenses to pay, and if they can get that work elsewhere, they are going to do their best to achieve that goal so that they can meet their bottom line every month. And as a result, then you're going to lose panel members who have a great deal of experience. You're going to have panel members that are used to dealing with complicated cases, thus ensuring efficiency throughout the entire system. And you're going to lose perhaps diversity in your panel, which is an important component when we are talking about serving the demographics of the people that we do. You want to make sure that you have as diverse a panel as possible. So all of those factors it could have a detrimental impact on what the panel looks like if the timeliness is an issue. Timeliness of payments is an issue.
Mm-hmm. Do either of you want to add anything to our conversation before we sign off?
I will also follow up on some of the smaller office issues that we face. And these are just some of the challenges that panel attorneys face when dealing with some of these larger cases. And Melody touched on this a little bit, but discovery now in the federal system happens in every case, and it's always voluminous, takes a lot of time to get through, and a lot of resources of a panel attorney are devoted to that. And so making sure that the panel attorneys are well resourced, because we don't always have access to the same third-party vendors that another larger law firm would have. And so that can impact the amount of time that we have to spend on a case, which thus increases the cost and efficiency of a case. The other thing that happens for smaller panel attorneys is in the event that you do go to trial, when you're a small office, the amount of time that you would spend on a CJA case takes you out of the office and puts you in trial, but that means you are forgoing other opportunities to earn money on other cases that may pay slightly better rates if you're not in trial. And so if you commit to the best possible defense for your client, and I know all CJA panel attorneys do, then the promise that you would expect on the back end is that you will be reimbursed for that time in a timely fashion because you committed to trial. You were forgoing all the other income that you would have received during that same period of time. And so just anecdotally talking to panel attorneys about delays in payments makes them very nervous, because you do not want to have a situation where you cannot meet your financial obligations as a small business because there are delays in payments as a result of budget shortfalls. And that's about what I'll add there.
Excellent. Thanks, Shazi. Melody, any concluding thoughts?
Yes, I would just add that to the extent that anyone was thinking that we were saving money now, or that, this is a very tight budget year, we understand that. But this shortfall is going to be so much more costly in the long run that it's really not saving anything. It's stressing the system now. It will result in more litigation. It will result in more appeals. It will result in us having to rebuild in ways that Shazi was talking about on the panel, but also in our office. And so funding us adequately now is actually more economical and more efficient than us trying to rebuild later. We're constitutionally mandated. We're not expendable in that way. And so making sure that we have enough funds to adequately represent the clients in a way that everybody has confidence in the system and confidence in the outcome is just better for the system all the way around. And I can't emphasize enough that this is not just something that's hitting certain individual offices, but it will have effects across the board for hearings, for appeals, for cases and outcomes, but especially for our clients and our clients' understanding of the system and their belief that they're getting adequate representation and their confidence in the outcome. Those things matter to the credibility of the justice system, and that's why we think funding is critical.
Well, thank you both for having this discussion with me, and thank you to everyone who's watching this for participating in ABA Day, for fighting for the Sixth Amendment. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shazi, Melody, and Kyle. Thank you for taking the time to walk us through such tremendous insights into what federal defenders do and confront both public defenders and CJA panel attorneys, and the challenges presented during this year's unusual funding process. Thank you each for your tremendous work. And thank all of you for your tremendous work, which we know you will place on hold to lend your experience and expertise at ABA Day in Washington and ABA Day Digital in support of federal public defense funding in fiscal year 2025. As you heard from the discussion, it's been a tumultuous year so far, and Congress is now considering what funding should be for next year, so your participation will be well timed. Our challenge is going to be that Congress is operating under budget caps that it set for fiscal years 24 and 25 as part of the bipartisan compromise last fall that helped the nation avoid defaulting on its debt. This means that we're concerned that lawmakers will be tempted to essentially just carry forward the funding it approved in 24 into 25. And if so, that's a problem for a number of reasons, including these. First, the funding approved for 24 was improved over the original numbers, but it still fell short of actual need. And cuts like that don't actually save money that lawmakers think. Those services must still be provided and paid for. The Constitution says so. And second, while the severe cuts proposed last summer were not adopted, no one knew what the final numbers were going to be until just a few weeks ago. So with only initial numbers to go by, the Defender Services Office had to assume the worst and imposed emergency budget measures back in June. Rebuilding after 8 months of a hiring freeze and loss of programs can be very expensive, yet those are costs that must be absorbed into this year's funding, which is already short of need. So it is all the more critical that Congress fully fund public defense for fiscal year 2025. Thank you again for your participation and helping us make that ask. To support you in that, we've prepared one-pagers and toolkits of additional information that may help you in communicating with your members and their staff. And you can know that those documents pull from the latest, most relevant information available. For those participating digitally, we've made it simple. Clicking on the button to take action on the issue will present you with the option to connect with your members by phone or email. The system will identify your members automatically and get you ready. Emails are going to be pre-formatted with our ask, which you should then just edit to put things in your own word and maybe use local examples that would matter to your members. If you choose the phone option, then the Capitol switchboard will actually call you and connect you with the first congressional office. With the talking points in hand, you can then speak with someone or leave a message. And when you complete that call, the system will automatically connect you to the next. And if you get a response from your members, please feel free to send those along to us in the ABA Governmental Affairs Office. We greatly appreciate it. With that, thank you again for your participation. The advocacy and information that you share matters more than you realize. Good luck on your outreach and let us know how we can support you. Thank you.